How are we doing, ladies and gentlemen? Coming to you from beautiful sunny Hawaii, although I'm recording this at night while the kids are asleep. I said content was going to be a little light this week while I'm out, which will continue to be the case, but given we're in the midst of Summer League, the Bulls have played their first 2 games so far, and more importantly, what I consider to be the bigger deal anyway, mainly because it's not often that we get to hear from these guys, but we got to hear from the Bulls management, the front office, Arturas Karnisovas and Marc Eversley, not live, but in speaking to the media members, and then relaying what was said in those conversations, and it was interesting. I say that mostly in a good way, but there were a few things that kind of made me raise my eyebrows a bit, and so I wanted to fill you guys in on what was said, how the front office is positioning the direction of this franchise, and share my thoughts on it as well. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, of course, you all know that back at the end of the season, after the Bulls lost in the play-in against the Miami Heat, putting the Bulls out of the playoffs for the second straight season, AK in a season-ending press conference emphasized his commitment to change. That what they're seeing on the court right now is not working, how they can't keep putting the same group out there and expect different results, and that the time for change was now. And I said this before, while it was good that AK for the first time finally admitted defeat in this roster he put together and took some accountability for the failure of it, at the same time I said I'll believe it when I see it in him actually enacting change, and not change being signing a couple veteran role players that we've seen him do the past 2 off seasons. But sure enough, I have to give him some credit. Might be a little too late, maybe the moves weren't ideal in terms of maximizing their assets, but changes have been made. First in trading Caruso, executing a sign-and-trade for DeMar DeRozan, drafting 19-year-old Modest Buzelis versus some older, more NBA-ready prospects that were available and on the board at the time at number 11, and based on what AK and Marc shared with the media, they're not done. They're not satisfied. This new iteration of the roster is still a work in progress. And in specifically stating, quote, that the changes that are happening right now are going to help us build for the future. And it's still not a final product. There's going to be constant adjustments. And I think the important thing to take away here is the changes they're making are helping to build this roster for the future. It's very different from the previous messaging of focusing on looking to be competitive now, maintaining continuity. The focus now is on the future. They're going to do everything they can to avoid calling this a rebuild or starting over, but that's more or less what this is. A clear pivot to a youth movement, going to younger players that can best position them for the future. Now, AK did also mention that 3 years ago, they had put together a plan, a formula in place to achieve success, which they acknowledged worked until they ran into injuries, mainly the injury to Lonzo Ball. Of course, Caruso missed a fair amount of time as well towards the end of that season because of that prick Grayson Allen. They then admitted going into the second and third year, they felt they owed it to the group in giving them a chance to figure things out, and since they of course did not figure it out, that's led to where we are today in making changes. But the one thing that I did think was interesting though, and honestly kind of shocked me, which Marc Eversley addressed specifically as it related to waiting too long to make this pivot in direction, was that DeMar DeRozan was almost central in that decision to giving these guys another chance that he even said himself, quote, like we told him, we're going to give them an opportunity to win, and he was a gigantic part of the reason for why we did that. Now, a few things. One, I don't know if they're saying that now after the fact, since they moved on from DeMar, to be like, hey, we were thinking about making changes and moving in another direction, but DeMar really wanted to keep this group together, and he was a big reason for why we kept them together, to give him an opportunity to win. And if that was in fact the case, I mean, sure, commendable on their part to give their best player, a respected veteran, a voice in what they're trying to do and giving him his input in the direction of this team, but really, I mean, anyone could see, as clear as day, after the failed second season of this roster, that this wasn't going to work. They weren't going to turn things around. Yeah, they might have been a little bit better. They maybe could have made it to the playoffs. They maybe could have made a first round series competitive. I'm saying this based on what we knew at the time in the summer of 2023, but we knew this roster had hit its ceiling. We knew they weren't going anywhere. They weren't going to be winning anything. That's great that they took DeMar's advice and words into consideration on whether or not to keep the group together, but if the reason they kept them together and didn't pivot earlier was all because of what DeMar wanted, man, that is just a horrible look for the front office, and probably not even something I would admit publicly if I were them. Some other takeaways from this discussion and what was said with the media that I was surprised to hear, and I'll start with what was said about Zach Lavine, because we've been constantly hearing about how the number one priority of this front office is to find a trade for Zach. But the market for Zach simply is not there. And when asked about Zach Lavine, they said they expect him to be fully healthy. AK said that I think that he can actually help this group next year. He's been professional. We expect him to be with us at the start of training camp. Quite the stark contrast from what we've been hearing before. I mean, I say I'm surprised, but at the same time, maybe not so surprised, because if there truly is no market for Zach Lavine and teams being interested in him, then yeah, what can they do than to just say, well, sorry buddy, you're under contract, we'll see you at training camp. Now, I don't think that means that the Bulls won't still try to find a trade for him. They will still explore options and will still hope to find a new home for Zach before the start of the season, but this indicates to me that they're not going to trade him just to trade him and execute a bad trade to just get off Zach's deal. And there's been talk about the Bulls needing to attach first-round picks to move off from Zach. It's pretty clear they're not willing to do that. They're going to keep him until they can get a proper trade that doesn't set them back and moving on from future assets, when especially they're now focused on the future. They need those future assets. So, I mean, we'll see where that ultimately ends up going. Just a couple weeks ago, I was talking about how I don't see a world in which Zach Lavine is on this roster come opening night, and how the longer they wait, the messier this relationship could become. But now, after these comments, I'm not so sure. Maybe there is a world where we might just see the return of Zach for his 8th season with this franchise. AK did also touch briefly on Lonzo Ball and how they hope to see him ready to go by the start of training camp, but we've also literally heard the same thing for the past 2 off seasons now, so I'll believe that one when I see it. And then they also talked about, resigning Patrick Williams, who they believe will be getting more opportunity to showcase what he can do, how they really missed his defensive versatility and shooting last season, and how this is going to be a big season for him as he's about to hit 23 years of age. So we'll see where all this goes. The big takeaway from all this, in my view, is the Bulls are not done. There are more moves to be made. They are going down a rebuild, even if they refuse to call it that, and we'll have to wait and see how the rest of this offseason unfolds to get a full grasp of what the opening night roster is going to end up looking like. I'll obviously discuss Summer League and the big takeaways from what we've seen thus far. Buzelis, Julian Phillips, even Sanogo, they've all looked very nice. I have a lot of thoughts on what I've seen from Buzelis thus far and watching the replays of the games, so I'll save that for another video. Might have to wait until after my trip. Let me know your guys' thoughts on what you've seen thus far in Summer League. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.